Make This Make Sense brings together 3 professors and dynamic guests to unpack
the systems, trends, and social dynamics everyone is confused about,
with the women who actually understand them. With your hosts,
entrepreneurship professor Dr. Colleen Robb,
entrepreneurship instructor Annie Stout,
and blockchain instructor Kelly Werder.
Dr. Katie McKnight is a dynamic presenter, dedicated teacher, and award-winning author with over 30 years in education, from classrooms in Chicago public schools to stages across U.S. and Europe. She's authored 17 books, including The Second City Guide to Improv in the Classroom. Welcome, Dr. Katie McKnight.
Hello, everyone. We're back. I'm
Hi.
super excited for our guest today, Annie. You have got somebody really amazing on tap, and we just had a moment to say hello to her, and I'm excited. This is going to be fun.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
And I'm back in Florida.
Yeah, but what's on your hat?
That is Cape Cod. It is an arm. Yes, it's the arm of Cape Cod on my hat because I'm having a bad hair day. So you're getting a hat today. It's a hat day. But I'm back home in my central air conditioning, and I'm quite happy. So yeah,
that's lovely. I love that. It almost looks like a cat with a tail up at maybe
the top.
I've never heard that one before. That's interesting. Usually, it's just the arm.
So, or like a moose. It kind of looks like a moose. Like, can you?
A moose?
No? Yeah.
Okay, these people have never seen a map, and I'm sorry. Geography is not. Luckily, neither of them teach geography. So
thank God.
Thank God, because what?
Yeah, I should not be teaching geography.
It's like a Rorschach test, right? Like, what do you see?
What is this?
Right now, it is.
Every Bostonian right now is laughing hysterically about this conversation because they're like, what are they talking about? For God's sakes, obviously it's Cape. It's the Cape.
No,
what are you talking about?
It could be a cat. It could be a moose. I mean,
no, it's not a cat or a moose. It's obviously the Cape. Anyway. All right, let's bring up our guest. I'm super excited, Annie. This is amazing. And welcome Dr. Katie McKnight to Make This Make Sense.
I knew that was Cape Cod on your hat, just for the record. All right. Yeah. And that Provincetown is at the little tippy at the end.
Yep.
But you're missing Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard.
Yeah, they're over here.
You need little dots. Yeah, you need little dots there for those.
We ignore them. Yes, we ignore them. So I grew up. I'm like right here is where I spend all my summers.
So is that Hyannis is south, right? It's on the
south.
Southern end. Yeah,
down there. I grew up right before you go over the bridges in Wareham. So that's where I was.
Born Bridge.
Yes, Born Bridge. I was right near there. Yeah, that's where I was for about a month in Buzzards Bay. So
nice, very nice, gorgeous. Yeah. With everybody else who goes to Cape Cod in the summer.
Exactly. Yes, we were all and got to hang out on the canal and watch some of the tall ships go through, and then went to Boston and saw them as well. So it was fun. It was a good.
Very cool.
I feel like you need a bigger hat now.
A bigger hat for the full, so you get the full effect of the whole entire Massachusetts. Yes. Yeah, we are missing. She's right though. Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard are missing. Sorry to the islands. It's the Cape and the islands, but we only get the Cape. Annie, I'm going to let you take it from here because I know you've got some questions for our guests.
I know, and it's ridiculous because I have them written down, old school.
Oh, in very big font.
Yes.
Exactly. With a Sharpie.
Do the glasses, but we'll see. Yes, really like a Sharpie and some notes. That's kind of how I roll, though. I mean, I don't know. It works. Okay. So thank you for taking the time to meet with us today. And I've kind of done a deep dive into what you've been working on, which is quite fascinating. So can you kind of give us an overview and make this make sense for our listeners in terms of what does brain-based learning mean?
You know, that's a great question. In education, we love throwing around terms and acronyms, and nobody knows what we're talking about. But brain-based learning basically is an educational approach that's rooted in neuroscience. And what we're learning from neuroscience really in the last 10 years is massive. I mean, it's pretty groundbreaking. And then with what we know how people learn, all ages, and how do our teaching methods align with how the human brain actually receives, possesses, retains information, and moving beyond, the idea of a traditional kind of passive lecture, like traditional kinds of schooling, and emphasizing like neuroplasticity, active participation, emotional well-being, and also physical movement. And in my area in particular, in adolescence, what we've learned about adolescent brain development in the last 10 years is massive. It's really huge. So because the brain is shaped by environment, social connections, experiences, the methodology of brain-based learning relies on several core kind of principles and actionable strategies that happen in the classroom. So, so like seeking meaning, emotional connections, and also recognizing the fact that the brain has neuroplasticity to it, and also feeling safe in your environment, because if you feel threatened in an educational environment or a learning environment, that inhibits learning. And so the idea of like active processing, brain breaks, and spaced repetition, and that's really critical in literacy development. So I generally work with teachers of older students, not the little itty bitties, the little people. And even though, for instance, to give you a quick example, like you may have learned Latin and Greek roots when you were in third and fourth grade, we still need to keep working with it because the complexity of it as you progress through your schooling changes. So you may know, for instance, the root sub, but when you were in fourth grade, you learned submarine, submarine, subway, something like that. But then when you're older, like in high school and beyond, it could be subterranean, subliminal. So it becomes more abstract, more content based. So that's just one kind of example, but that's it in a nutshell of what it actually means.
So I'm curious. I know you said that you work with older students. We've talked about this on a previous episode that male prefrontal cortexes develop later than females, right? And so does that play any kind of role in how you are teaching and how you are educating, or do you kind of take the same approach regardless of the age?
Yes and no, and a lot of it is that we don't know, like we're still learning. And what we've learned in the last 10 years in particular is really groundbreaking. So Sarah Jane Blakemore, who's out of Oxford University, has one of the premier labs in neuroscience. Or I'm sorry, she's not in Oxford. Oh, sorry about that. Hang on. Let me make sure that is closed out. Sorry about that. I thought it was closed out and it wasn't. Okay. Yeah.
We saw nothing and know nothing, so it was all you.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it was like a ding 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 coming in because it was a message. Sorry about that. I'm sorry. She's not at University of Oxford, so let me go back. So Sarah Jane Blakemore out of Cambridge University. She studied at Oxford University. She is one of the premier neuroscience labs in the world. And so she really explores the teenage brain. I highly recommend her book, which is Inventing Ourselves. And what we found, to get back to your question, is that it has to do, it looks like, with the onset of puberty. So the onset of puberty tends to happen in girls earlier than it does in boys. And the prefrontal cortex goes through a massive reshaping at this time. And so we've always known that teenagers lose their minds, but now we have the biological proof that that is indeed true, that they do lose their minds.
That's
And
amazing.
bless their hearts. And that's also why they need more sleep too. And what the theory is now, we have evidence that the change in the adolescent brain is as dramatic as 0 to 12 months. And it takes a long time. So onset of puberty, really, I mean, you see it with college students, it'll kind of settle down in like mid-20s. And so it's a very, very long time. So what happens is like abstract thinking, reading of emotions, social cues, things like that. They have all these miscues that happen. And so there's a lot of debate too with teenagers in middle school and high school of like, when should we teach algebra? Because it's abstract. And so my
Wow.
area is literacy and English and such. And I always joke about this with ELA teachers is that, what's the difference when you teach Shakespeare to a middle school kid or a freshman in high school as opposed to a senior in high school? It's massively different because they're starting to get the abstract things, the inferences in a way that they don't when they're younger because they're more concrete. So Piaget talked about it, Piaget's work, like concrete operational is really until late adolescence. But now we can actually look at the brain while it is processing information. And that's because of the technology. So it's pretty massive. So yes, that is true that our dudesters go through it a little bit later than our girls do. And it has to do with the onset of puberty. So puberty is not just like physical changes, but also the mental cognitive changes that happen.
That's super interesting. You just mentioned something that just jumped in my head when you're talking about teaching Shakespeare at different ages. Also Greek mythology. I just saw the Odyssey this like couple days ago, and I had this flashback to doing the Orestian trilogy Greek play in 5th grade. I was 10.
Oh
like
my
10 and
goodness.
11-year-olds. And I'm like,
That's
why
crazy.
did we do that?
Probably because the teacher wanted to.
Yeah. Exactly.
Like so
Finally.
weird. Looking
Yeah.
back, but it was also like, what an interesting experience. But there's no way we were appreciating. Like, I don't think we could comprehend that at such a young age, but it's kind of interesting. I don't think I recognize a lot of that, and I'm not sure that we're necessarily teaching to the proper mental development sometimes. It's
That's very true. And there's been a lot of discussion about that. John Medina, his work, brain rules, like that our schools don't line up with how we know that kids learn best. The late Sir Ken Robinson also wrote about this extensively too, that schools are really not designed and set up for how we actually know how people learn. And it's interesting too, because high school teachers in particular will say, oh, well, I need to lecture because I'm getting them ready for college. And I had a 15-year career in higher ed as a professor and, hang out in colleges and stuff too. And I just look at them and say, actually, they don't teach that way anymore, or they're getting away from it and having things like freshman experience and more collaborative because they realize that the big lecture classes have a very high failure rate, and that leads to student attrition. And and they've known it for years, but it's cost effective to do it that way. And but that's changing, and not everybody believes me, but
We believe you.
because it's not what we experienced. Yeah, I know, exactly.
We know.
Because it's not
Yeah.
what we experienced, right? So if it's not what we experienced, then it's a harder sell. Like,
Yeah.
well, I memorized 100 vocabulary words and I turned out just fine. I'm like, well, how many of those do you know? Do you use capricious every day in your in your idiolect? I probably not. Who does?
Yeah, and I mean, you mentioned sleep earlier, and I've got neighbors, and their kids are like waiting for the bus at like 6:30 in the morning.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't really comprehend that, right? And it's the high school students that get up earlier than the younger students, and you were mentioning that sleep is really important for adolescents. So is that something that you've looked at or thought about? It just doesn't seem to make sense.
Yeah, I haven't done any studies or anything on that, but there are studies out there about middle schools and high schools that actually have a later start time. That, gee, guess what? Student achievement actually goes up. So I work a lot in schools that have gaps in student performance, and I just look at them. It's like you know how you can get like a 7 to 8% gain without doing really anything is change your start time. And they just throw up their hands because they're like, we can't, because it has to do with the bus cycles. And so they usually have the older students out earlier because it's safer, and then they rotate, and then the littles usually start the latest. And I've been in schools where the start time is later. There's one district that I work with in particular in Virginia, and their start time is 9 o'clock. And it's like night and day, and then I was also, the earliest start time I ever worked with a school was in St. Louis, and their start time was 7:10. I'm going to say it very close, 7:10 in the morning. And guess what? First period, how that looked. And it was also,
nobody's awake, including the teacher.
Nobody's awake. And so I'd walk into a classroom where there should be 25 students, and there's only 8. And of course the failure rate for first and second period was like 80-90%. And so we do things more out of pragmatics of what fits, what works, looking at budget. And I'm sensitive to those things. I get that. You can't, spin straw into gold if you don't even have the straw. And it actually inhibits what's best for kids and what's best for students. And so that's really frustrating. And of course, there's a lot in my field right now. There's been some big studies that have come out in mainstream media about, right now we have the lowest reading performance nationally. And it's not all COVID related. We had the problem before COVID, but it just kind of exacerbated it, like really blew it up, like we really saw what was going on. And one of the things is having to do with media distractions and screens and things like that. And there are studies that are pretty conclusive that how we read on a screen is different than how you read paper-based. And so I'm really worried, actually, about middle school kids in particular. Middle school kids really got shellacked in like 2020 to 2022. And colleagues, friends of mine who are still in higher ed, they're seeing it. They see that huge gap because it's starting to show up. And then people, who own businesses and things like that, they're seeing it as well. And so, we have to drill down of, these are resources. How are we going to best leverage them to really meet the needs of our students? And things do change because the world changes. And I was in high school in the 1980s, and how I was taught is very different than what we know now how we should be teaching. So,
but the 80s were great.
80s were great.
Oh,
Big
Annie.
hair. Remember too, Annie, do you remember the hair that was like, it looked like somebody went into like slammed into a door? Yeah. And it went like this, like lots and lots of hairspray and everything else. Yeah.
That's
Good
great.
times.
Total side note, but while I was up north, I went to a restaurant/arcade called Rewind. It was completely 80s themed.
Oh,
The
cool.
bathroom was all Pac-Man, and it had Aquanet, and I was never happy.
Love that.
And the arcade was all the old school arcade games. Like, it was.
Do you remember
amazing.
too, Kelly, like you put your quarter down when you wanted
Yes.
to be next in line? That was it.
It's like a passive aggressive. Like,
So when somebody's game was done, it's like, no, I'm next.
Like,
you
no,
put your
you're not
quarter down, like it's a
quarter.
poker chip. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like
Yeah.
it's a poker chip.
Yeah, it was really fun. But the Aquanet in the bathroom was just piece de resistance. I was like, okay.
Yeah.
And then I did. And I was like, yep. Mm-hmm.
Some of that too, like don't go near an open flame.
right. Right.
Okay. Anyway, Annie,
I'm glad you made it back, Kelly.
Back to the show.
So part of what I was really excited to talk to you about is improvisation. Colleen and I have an undergraduate degree. We have undergraduate degrees in theater, and we actually presented on utilizing subtext in our classrooms. And I think improvisation is one of those things that need to tell stories is still very powerful in a classroom, and even in our field, we can use it. Do you have any tips, or what does the research say about using improvisation to inform and increase reading fluency and comprehension?
Oh my goodness. Okay, so there aren't really any large studies. So I'm just going to rewind here for a moment about oh my gosh, I can't believe it's this long ago, about 20 years ago. Ugh. My late sister, yeah, I know. My late sister was the head of writing and educational programs at Second City in Chicago. And she and another colleague of hers were developing some programming and looking at bullying prevention and how you could use improv to do like scenes, vignettes, things like that. And I said, why don't you come see my students? I was a professor at the time at a state university, and why don't we try it out? But honestly, I think there's more to it than that. And because I was familiar enough with what improv is and such. So what happened is that they came in, and these were my graduate students who were training to be English literacy teachers. And we just saw so many connections as far as vocabulary development, finding voice, developing skills in inferencing, sequencing of plot, basically every single literacy or reading quote unquote standard that states have, you could have it connected to improvisation. And what I got particularly nerded up about is that it had huge implications as far as that it is a visceral physical experience for students. So you can practice these skills in a physical way, an emotive way that would carry over. So what we found, we actually did a research study on it. And what we found was that we did see gains in reading, writing development. And one of the other really critical findings that we had was how it impacted students with special needs, particularly students on the spectrum. Now, remember, this was 20 years ago. And it makes sense. I also have a 25-year-old son with autism. And what it does is that it spells out those social cues and those social expectations with the concept of yes and, give and take, and working as an ensemble. So those inferential, like social rules or social norms, are very much spelled out and concrete for individuals that are on the spectrum. So as far as like audience, vocabulary, all of that, it makes sense. But if we recall, the foundational artist for improvisation, Viola Spolin, Chicago girl, she got her start by working with children and families in settlement houses, Hull House, most famously in Chicago, and she was working with these students who there was just this cacophony of languages, and how do we better communicate? And so she created these improvisational games. And one of the things that I did in the education world, I refer to them as exercises or strategies instead of games. Because if you say games, everyone in education tends to say, oh, well, there's no educational value. And what standard? How does this prepare kids for testing? Right. And it's like, you're not getting it. So anyway, so she developed these games, and it was her son, Paul Sills, who founded Second City in Chicago. It was Compass Theater first, and then that. So the roots of improvisation are actually in education, and so we can talk a lot about it as far as like building community and ensemble and things like that. But there's also very specific literacy skills that students develop. Pre-writing skills, drafting, first draft of written text, things like that. And that's the thing. It's like everybody thinks that improv is just a bunch of make-em-ups, but there's a lot of exploration. But there are scripts. There's actual scripts that are developed, and most people don't realize that. And so anyway, but yeah. So that's it in a nutshell. On a sidebar, if you guys want, I have a white paper kind of with like some simple exercises that I usually hand out to folks. I can share that with you guys. And, if you want to include that.
That'd be great. We'd love to include that in the show notes. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I can share that with you guys. Let me leave myself a note so when I hang up, I don't forget to do it. Okay.
We'll remind you to. She's gonna. Annie's got a big Sharpie that she's writing a note right now.
Yeah, I see that.
Remind you.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean,
Annie, you're muted.
Yeah, but so like Annie and I actually use a lot of our theater background.
Yes, we do.
While we're teaching entrepreneurship. How does, and I'm just gonna throw out an example at the yes and exercise for those people that don't know, right, is you create a scene and you can't say no, right? So if I say, let's build a circus with, I don't know, giraffes on roller skates, you have to say yes and.
Yes. And I really like wombats too. So let's have some wombats, and we can have them in little clown collars and have them drive around in little cars too.
Yes, and we can put the snails in the back of the cars just because they're teeny tiny and they can fit in the trunk. And I think that snails would really like being close in proximity. And
let's make them talking snails.
Yes.
I'm way too practical for this exercise.
Because that lawyer brain is like, well, there's no talking snail.
My lawyer brain's like, I'm going to need waivers.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of liability involved with wombats driving cars. The giraffes on roller skates are a problem. We've got, like all I'm seeing is liability and waivers needed and lawsuits. That's what I say.
I got one.
Okay, but I do actually have a question. How does that translate to reading?
And literacy? Well, just the fact that it's a growth mindset, right? So one of the things, for instance, is when we look at comprehension or a standard that's in every single state is, finding the controlling idea or focus of the text and evidence to support that. So we already have like a controlling idea in that example. So he's like, oh, let's have a circus. And then here's, it's going to be a fun circus. And how do we know it's going to be a kind of a fun, unique, no circus like any other one before? Oh, it's going to have giraffes on roller skates. It's going to have wombats driving a car with little, clown collars. We're going to have snails that can talk. So what it does is that it draws attention to details and how details develop an idea. And that's so much, a foundation in reading, right? And then I can even talk about that with inferencing too. So with the author and we have, our controlling idea or evidence, what do you think that the author could be communicating? What do you think the theme might be? So getting into subtext, well, the theme could be is that circuses are an opportunity for creativity and exploration. It could be a theme. Or a concept as far as like creativity or being, what am I trying to say? Like new ideas, like exploring ideas that have never been innovators. That's what I'm trying to say. So that's where that kind of comes in too. And so if I said something like, oh well, our circus is if I like didn't yes and it, I'm trying to think of a non-example right now, like something that would have like just trashed our example. It wouldn't have been growth of like
there
oh
is no
no,
circus. Yeah.
yeah, like there
Yeah.
can't be a circus like that because the local authority will never give us, you know,
You'll never get a
authorization to
permit.
do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll never get a
Mhm.
permit to
Mhm.
that. And our lawyer says we're
Yes.
stupid to do that because of the
Right.
liabilities.
So let's all
And
walk out.
so
Yeah.
so what you immediately did was just like squash everything, right? And in like reading world too, it's that idea of there's like some creativity that's involved too. Like we need to explore text, we need to see what the text is communicating, how it's communicating, and then do you have evidence to support that as well. And I think that's one of the things that is really problematic right now, is that we're teaching kids how to read to respond but not comprehend. And so, and a lot of that has to do, I think, too. I don't want to sound like a little old lady with blue hair on the bench, but all this technology too. When I get a text, I respond. How many times have us had the experience where we write an email or whatever, and we know they didn't read it?
Yeah.
And
Usually
I mean, yeah, and I just found out was like TLDR. I didn't know what that is. Too long, didn't read. I'm like, oh my gosh, don't ever send that to me again, because I'll be on the news. And I won't say nightly news because everybody streams it, but I'll be on TikTok from some news thing because I murdered everybody because of that. I mean, it's like, what do
this
you
is
mean
taking
you
a
didn't
turn.
read it? Yeah. And so we're teaching kids
It's
to
really funny
respond.
because I
Mhm.
have TLDR as part of my show notes for my other show. For this one, I changed it to topics for that reason. Didn't
There
think it
you
was going to
go.
go over very well.
Yeah. And the other thing too is that with comprehension, what we know too, to get kids into deeper reading, to go from just like literal, like skimming the text, to deep comprehension, and this is in all of the standards too, is that you have to have a really good question, more of a rhetorical question, or an essential question. So, for instance, how can an unexpected event lead to long lasting consequences? That's the question to ask, rather than where is Mount St. Helens? What happened in Mount St. Helens in the 1980s? Who was impacted by that? What were the environment? Now, those things are important, but when you think of the continuum of reading, those are very basic, kind of like who, what, when, where. And I'm not asking a big question. And that spans, to answer that big question, do I need to have the evidence and details from the text? Absolutely. But that's not the beginning and the end. That big juicy question is the one that gives me purpose, engagement, motivation to actually read. And we don't do enough of it right now. And we absolutely have to, because our kids keep reading on a very surface level. So another place where improv and literacy intersect as well is that I can answer that question in different ways with different evidence. It doesn't all have to be the same evidence or the reasoning. And when you do that, it's phenomenal. And I'm thinking of this one seventh grade classroom that I was working with in particular, is that in the past, it was very much a study guide where the kids just answered, who was there, what was there, whatever. So you're just on that very literal level of reading comprehension. And we switched it up, and we had that very question of how can an unexpected event lead to long lasting consequences? And I had a model text. We looked at Mount St. Helens and looked at that. But because the question was posed the way it was, what the kids realized when we were looking at effects is that they all impacted each other, that it wasn't just a list. It was these factors impacted each other. So, for instance, the eruption in Mount St. Helens in the 80s created an environmental impact. And because it had an environmental impact, it affected things economically, like the lumber industry there. And then that became political because of that impact and the tax base and everything else. And the kids started figuring out, like, here's the thing, but it actually had multiple impacts on the community. And we would not have gotten there if I said, where was Mount St. Helens? What industry was impacted the most? The answer is C, lumber. And they realized that, and then they applied it to different other kinds of historical events and made comparisons. So that's where you get into like more complex thinking, more creativity, more neuroplasticity in the thinking, rather than just but our poor teachers, they're just under so much incredible pressure with test scores and things like that, that many of them are, I would argue, are just scared to death to do anything that's not in this column. But the kids are assessed that way of here's the claim, and then where do you see from the texts how that supports that claim? And then they're required to write something too. And that's how most states do it now. It's not like we had in the olden days where it's, what does this word mean in this sentence? There's some of that, but not to the same extent. So.
And I think, and it's interesting, I think at the college level or the university level that there's like this idea that everybody, that the subject matter experts go into the class thinking that maybe reading is not their problem and that they don't need to pay attention to that. And that's not, in their job description, and not in this group, because we have educators that are very dedicated to pedagogy. So I'm interested in like, how can we adopt some of these principles for the university setting?
Yeah. So at the college setting, at the university setting, and it's interesting because I have worked with four-year colleges and community colleges and such, addressing this very issue. And it really boils down to these things. These are the things that move the needle. This is what makes people better readers. So as a professor, as an instructor, this is what I would do. And so we don't have a decode. So I'm talking about kids who or students that don't have a decoding issue, so they've got phonics, they've got phonemic awareness, but these are students like, how do you improve their reading comprehension? And it boils down to this. As we're previewing a text, or when students are going into text, I would encourage them to look for words that they don't know or words that they're not sure of, and write them down. You write down what the meaning is. It's very interesting. We have over 2 million words in the English language, and the average person knows about 20,000 of those words. And really smart people, like the people on this podcast and who listen to it, are more like about 60,000. Okay, so you're never going to know all the words. So what's important is you learn what to do when you see a word that you don't know. So preview, write it down, and that leads into purposeful annotation, is have students engage in purposeful annotation, which is different than highlighting. And annotation is, what questions do I have, or an aha that I have, or a detail that's interesting. And there's lots of annotation systems out there, but encouraging them to annotate. And then in my content area of probably having some special things that I'm looking for that have to deal with my content study. And then big questions. Big, like thematic, essential, rhetorical kinds of questions are really important. So we have vocabulary, annotation, big questions. Then summarization is really, really key. Is, can you summarize what that article said, stated? Can you summarize what this section stated? And just doing that on a regular basis, again, that foists them up to higher levels of comprehension. So it's not just volume, it's being able to put it into like a comprehensive, summative kind of ball is what you're really looking at. And so and I remember too in college, of like, it was like details. If you didn't remember a particular detail, you got that one wrong on the final, and it was just kind of like a gotcha kind of thing. But we want to look at things more in, what does this all mean, and how is this relevant to this course, the big principles of the course, why I'm taking this course. So summarization, graphic organizers are huge, and graphic organizers, mind maps, things like that. They really help to organize information. So one of the things that I learned is I started creating my syllabus, and I put all my requirements in there, but then I also had a graphic organizer so students knew what the topic was, what I had to prepare, and what was coming up next. So those are really the big things that move the needle, that also improve instruction. And then evidence-based writing, of course, is also part of that as well. So those are really the things that move the needle. And it's not extra stuff to put in. It's just good. I'm from Chicago, so it's pedagogy. Pedagogy. It's it's just better, right? And it improves my instruction. And so that's what I always get at. But that vocabulary is really a huge thing, and especially at the college level, where we're really getting into jargony specific things that have to do with that content. So it's quite critical that students have some fluidity with that. And so when they encounter content specific text, that they can handle that, that they can maneuver within that.
That is extremely helpful, because I oftentimes have students read case studies in class. And so these are just 4 ideas that I can immediately apply to a session. Extremely helpful, like these 4 guiding principles that we can use immediately.
Yeah, and actually the book I just finished, it just hit the presses last month, is on it's the science of reading, grades 4 through 12, every subject every day, and we divide it up as far as like before reading, during reading, after reading. Like, this is what you do to improve comprehension. So I always say the solutions are simple. It's the implementation and sustainability. That's always the hard part, right? And to get folks aligned. And we all agree that this is important, but we're going to have to die in the same hill. We'll have to take it out to the parking lot and fight it out. Like, we all agree that deep reading comprehension and improving our students' reading comprehension in our courses is really important. So can we just decide that we're all going to do blank? And or we'll all preview vocabulary and remind students to annotate the vocabulary, so it doesn't interfere when they get stuck on a word. If you don't know the word, it's going to inhibit the comprehension. So you need to know 98% of the words on a page in order to comprehend the text. So as we get really jargony, you're missing a lot of words. And that can really impede comprehension, and especially for our students who are multilingual learners as well too. It's like we have to be really explicit about it and concrete. So the danger is, don't assume. Just don't assume. And then that also gives them skills too beyond college, right? So the most complicated, difficult text that I encountered in the last year and a half was the state of Missouri vendor application. Oh. It was horrible. And
I guarantee you it was written by a lawyer.
Guarantee. Oh, yeah, my God, it was horrible. And I read that thing twice. I was annotating. I was, I had a graphic organizer. So I called up my business manager, who can basically find, fly poop and pepper. And Elena and I just sat down and went through the whole thing to figure out what was actually required and stated and everything else. And it took every single skill, every single resource I had to figure out what that document wanted me to do. It was horrible. So, yeah.
I know Annie's going to wrap us up here in a minute, but yes. I will share an idea that I had when I was in college, and it was for a nightclub called The Context Clue. And every week it would change theme, and you had to guess the theme based on the context. And so if anybody wants to steal that idea, I will fly to wherever that club exists. But it just reminded me of that. And I haven't thought about that in like 20 years. So anyway, I just wanted to share that. The Context Clue will be the next big club.
Yeah, and then your logo could be like C to the second,
Yes. Exactly. You get
That's
it.
what your logo. Yeah. And only people who are hip are going to understand that context.
My whole class next semester is going to be the context clue. That's exactly what we're going to be doing.
I love it.
So thank you for your time and dedication to the subject today. I just wanted to end on some of your literature states that good reading tactics or a good literacy plan improves social interaction, critical thinking, self-efficacy, self-confidence, creative problem solving, and idea generation. And these are topics that we utilize in our entrepreneurship courses all the time. And so can you just, wrap us up with that subject?
Oh my goodness. Boy, that's a biggie, huh? So when I was it's interesting. I just moved recently and I found my first philosophy of teaching essay that I had to write, that every teacher had to write when they were in teacher school. And this is how old I am now. It was on a dot matrix printer. But I somehow found it with a paper copy of my teaching certificate. And I was reading, 21-year-old Katie, and boy, was I optimistic. And I decided to really dedicate my teaching career. I started out teaching high school, middle school students, and now my work is heavily focused in adolescents. And really, it boiled down to this: it's such an awkward time, and when we're all teenagers, we go through that time where we're trying to figure out who we are, what we stand for, and how we're going to fit in the adult world that we're transitioning into. And I really look at it as a vocation more than anything else, of teaching teenagers in particular how to develop their literacy skills so that they can be a powerful voice, so they can express their desires, their needs, their wants in articulate ways that their fellow citizens or coworkers or family members can actually hear, and be a force for change. And if we don't have those skills, we don't possess those skills, we don't have confidence, we don't have self-efficacy, we don't have opportunities that we would otherwise. So this may sound melodramatic, but I've always believed that the work that I do in working in schools and getting student achievement up in literacy is a life or death issue. And that when we're deficit in those skills, that it shuts us out of society. And I can't think of any more motivating reason for me to do it. That's why I'm still at it after 40 years. I kept thinking I was going to retire this year, but I'm like, nah, I'm having too much fun and I enjoy my work too much that I'm still doing it. And just published another book. So yeah, so that's really it in a nutshell, and how that connects. And the same thing with what you do with entrepreneurship. I'm sure you've seen the transition in students, that they may be lacking some confidence or whatever, and then they develop the skill set in order to get an idea out there, and that it's received and embraced, how powerful that is. And so, this is where that intersects.
Okay, great. And so to wrap us up, thank you again. So reading in the university classroom would all make sense if...
Oh my gosh. So a lot of times high school teachers and professors will say, I'm the chemistry teacher, I'm not a reading teacher. And there's assumptions that have been made. So I always say, do you remember when you had your first PhD class? What was the first class you had? And then also in law too. So the first class I had was how to read reading research. And I'm sure, Kelly, you had how to read legal briefs and legal decisions.
Absolutely.
And then what was the second one? how to write legal briefs,
Yep.
and
we
then
did
how
exactly.
to write research, right? We all had that, and our professors taught us that. And so our students, even at the collegiate graduate level, they need to see how we as experts in our content area read and understand complicated text in our field, and they need to see it. So even as a professor, when I taught doctoral students in reading, I would show them how I broke down a research article and made sense of it. And I use things like, I don't know this vocabulary term. I'm not quite sure what the stat analysis is, and going through it. So I think we forget that, and we just make these assumptions, and people will say, oh, well, you know, when I was in school, I did blah, 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 blah. But how many of us were lost in a college course because we didn't understand what we were reading or what we were studying? How many of us did that? And if the professor took some time and showed us, like, you know, actually showed what was behind the screen, that would save a lot of hardship and give folks the confidence that they need to tackle these challenging things.
Thank you. Thanks so much for joining us. I learned a lot.
Before we go, we didn't explain one thing. So we all have kind of like a funny little headline underneath our names.
Oh,
and Katie decided to add one herself, but we didn't explain what the heck cookie pusher means. So if you'd like to elaborate why you chose that to be under your name.
Yeah. So in a past life, I was a Girl Scout troop leader for over 10 years. So, you know, of course, there was cookie season every year, which is ironic because I was a brownie.
Season.
I was a brownie dropout. Yeah.
Oh,
so
I was
lasted
too.
in brownie. Yeah.
Oh my
I was
gosh,
a
we're all
brownie dropout.
dropouts.
That's
yeah,
so funny.
I was a brownie dropout. And so how did I become a Girl Scout troop leader is that my daughter, who's now 30, she came home one day and she's like, Mama, I want to be a Girl Scout, you know, and there were no troops. So hence. And then the other thing, I bake a lot too. I bake. And so if I'm ever invited to something, I usually have cookies that are baked or something like that. So, and then my husband refers to me as Cookie Girl. So.
I mean, I live for Thin Mint season, and when I see them start hanging out near Publix, I'm like, oh, my dealer's back. Awesome.
Yeah. The most ironically named cookie, the Thin Mint.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
One sleeve at a time. Yeah.
Yeah. It's not a GLP-1, that's for sure.
No.
Oh my gosh.
I don't know.
Yeah. No, the Samoa's the coconut caramel one, which are 500 calories a cookie. Those are mine.
Don't read that.
No, we don't. There's no calories. There's no calories in Girl Scout cookies. That's my understanding.
No, that doesn't make any sense.
No. I also want to just share your website, KatherineMcKnight.com, if people want to connect further with you. And also we'll have that in our show notes, and also on LinkedIn, you're Katie McKnight, PhD. So go connect with Katie.
Yeah. Well, thank you for the opportunity, thanks for having this awesome podcast. And I really just loved meeting you. I can't wait to meet you guys in person.
I know that'll be fun soon.
Yeah.
Really.
And thanks, Annie, for finding this amazing guest for us.
Thanks for saying yes, Katie.
Yes, and.
Yes, and.
Here we are. Yeah.
Yes, and.
Yes, and.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.